Hello, welcome to the Roundtable. We bring you expert analysis on global issues. Please stay tuned for what we have prepared for you today. I'm going to introduce today's guest. We are joined by Professor Lee In-bo. Welcome back to the Roundtable, Professor Lee.
Thank you. It's a great pleasure to be here.
And we are also joined by Dr. Han-Seonhee. Welcome to the Roundtable.
Thank you for having me today.
A land of opportunities, the last growth engine of the globe. All these are descriptions for Africa. South Korea is poised to strengthen ties with Africa through the Korea-Africa Summit, which takes place in this June. Professor Lee, the Korea-Africa Summit is the first multilateral summit meeting Korea holds with African countries. Please explain the summit meeting for our viewers more in detail.
Right. So, as you mentioned, the Korea-Africa Summit will be a landmark event that is going to hopefully take the Korea and Africa relations, both bilateral and multilateral, to the next level. The relationship between Korea and Africa has started all the way back in the 60s, but I think it is really starting in the last 2 decades or so that the relationship between the continent and South Korea has really started to deepen. So starting from 2006, when the former President Roh Moo-hyun visited Africa, we started to do the Korea-Africa Forum that was held at the high levels of exchanges for every 3 to 5 years or so. But the summit this time around is trying to take this to a new height, where now we'll be having the South Korean president as well as the key ministerial positions and the other dignitaries attending from the South Korean side. As well as the representatives from the African Union and the various different African countries were invited and expected to attend. At the same time, there will be representatives from civil society organizations, international organizations as well. So this event is scheduled for June 4th to 5th in Seoul and Kintex in Ilsan. It's going to be hopefully a great opportunity for us to really try to gain further mutual understanding between Korea and the continent and to further enhance the relationship with the continent as well.
What accounts for this renewed activism in diplomacy toward African countries by South Korea, Dr. Han, these days?
Yes, it is because Africa is emerging as a strategic partner at the international stage. So the changes in the world power dynamics and the fragmentation of the world economy, this all makes Africa step into the spotlight with its political and social and economic importance. So Africa is gaining prominence, first with its growing population and a consumer market, and also second with its abundant natural resources, and third with its geopolitical importance and diplomatic leverage, as it comprises of 54 sovereign states. So if we picture the map of Africa, geopolitical importance comes from its location that connects Europe and the Middle East. Countries like Egypt and Djibouti and Somalia, they are all located along the important shipping routes like the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden. And also you have the countries like down there, Kenya, Tanzania, and Mozambique and South Africa in the east and south. And also countries like Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana in Nigeria. And they all serve as a very important transport hub for the Indian Ocean and Atlantic Ocean as well. Plus, this location is also a matter of military cooperation. So 14 non-African countries, including US, France, Germany, Italy, and the UAE, and so on, those countries have their military bases in 23 different African countries. And plus, the Africa very often plays a cast votes in decision making at the international community. So it commands 27% of the total votes at the UN, and which carries a significant moral authority. This all makes really for the reasons discussed, the developing diplomatic ties with Africa is now not an option, but is a necessity.
It's not an option, but it's a necessity, because Africa, with great potential, with how many countries? 54, you mentioned?
Countries.
And accounting for more than a quarter of all the votes in the United Nations, is part of the important reality, right, in the global affairs.
Yes, true.
Okay. Africa holds considerable economic values. When it comes to Africa's growth potentials, population is one of the most positive factors that are frequently cited. A study shows that those who are 25 years old or younger account for over 60% of the continent's 1.4 billion population. Professor Lee, I think Africa has a good problem to have, young and thriving big population compared to South Korea with a shrinking population. So the huge size of population in African continent must be the locomotive of Africa's regional economic growth and the global economy as well.
They have a growing young population that is starting up already as very tech savvy and having sort of a middle class taste for the consumer market as well. People want the smartphones, they want good TVs and computers and things like that. Given these potentials as well, not just for Africa with the youth population growing for the labor market, but also in terms of very complicated, sophisticated consumer market as well, I think it offers a lot of, again, potential and possibilities for the global economic development in the future. Having said that, obviously, as you mentioned, this is a good problem to have in the sense that the growth of young population as such is also very closely related to the problem of youth unemployment, for instance. So as we have more and more young people coming to the cities looking for jobs, yet facing high levels of unemployment with limited supply of public services and infrastructure, limited education or health service access, for example, I think tackling these questions and problems is going to be a major issue as the African countries are trying to deal with this situation. And I think that maybe also offers an opportunity for greater collaboration and cooperation, because their problem can be also something of an opportunity for us as well. I think if we can try to make greater investments into building the basic infrastructure for the provision of public services and so on, I think this is not just helping Africa or providing aid, but more about trying to build a more resilient and sustainable global economy. So it'll be a win-win for the African continent as well as the interested countries around the world.
It'll be a win-win situation. Okay. According to a 2023 economic growth outlook by the International Monetary Fund, 5 countries in Africa, including Niger, Senegal, and Libya, recorded a growth rate of 6 to 11%. Dr. Han, that's very impressive growth rates, and we have to talk about not just the growing and young population that African countries are endowed with, but also very rich endowment of natural resources.
Yes, like I mentioned earlier, so Africa has abundant natural resources in terms of land and minerals, and also renewable energy resources. So to begin with, Africa has 65% of the uncultivated arable land in the world. So this can really dramatically increase the agricultural production in the region. And this can really help the continent transform from net importer of food to a net exporter. And in line with the growing population, the African food and agricultural market is predicted to triple from 2023 to 2030. And secondly, Africa is rich in its mineral resources. The continent holds 30% of the world mineral reserves. And the potential is even higher because it accounts only for 5% of world production of minerals. And particularly, many African countries produce critical minerals like lithium, cobalt, nickel, platinum, so on, which are very essential for high-tech industry and green products. For example, the Democratic Republic of Congo, it produces the 70% of the world cobalt. Another example is South Africa, which is a major player in the global mining sector. So it produces, it's the largest producer of the platinum group. And also other minerals like copper is produced in Zambia, and lithium in Zimbabwe, and graphite in Tanzania and Madagascar, and so on. So the demands for these minerals will increase exponentially in the next decades. So Africa is becoming a very important strategic partner for especially for economic security and stabilize the supply chain of these minerals. And lastly, I'm going to talk about the renewable energy resources in Africa. So it has potential in solar and wind and hydropower. And after the global energy crisis in 2022, the green transition and the development of renewable energy resources have been accelerated in the world. And evidently, the largest chunk of the foreign direct investments that flowed into Africa has been allocated to the renewable energy sector. And it's not just about the resources they have now, but it's about the resources they will have in the future, because Africa is in a very great position to produce hydrogen using these renewable resources.
Yeah, that's an amazing story, because when we think of the fourth industrial revolution with the semiconductors and the electric vehicles or the second generation batteries, they need resources, right? Energy, and where do they come from? Africa has all of this, right? And I'm so impressed by the fact that you mentioned that 65% of the entire untouched land is concentrated in the African continent for farming and settlement in the future. That's amazing potential. The World Bank already predicted in 2012 that information and communications technology would be the next locomotive for the economic growth of Africa. In African countries, the digital industry is growing at an astonishing pace. So, Professor Lee, are there some examples that these African countries are thriving to combine the endowment of natural resources and young and growing population with the digital technological development?
The possibilities that the young population offers with their tech-savvy backgrounds and the exposure to these information technology from very early ages offers a lot of opportunities for the African countries to really capitalize on sort of breaking into the digital economy. So I've done a little bit of research for this, and for example, Kenya has been dubbed as Silicon Savannah, for instance, as a leader of African digital economy. They have been known for sort of advances in these type of technologies from like more than a decade ago, for example, with M-Pesa, the famous mobile payment system that has penetrated the overall national economy and the economies of the surrounding countries to a great extent, making greater investments into also things like fintech, agri-tech, and health technology as well. And many of the other countries in the region are following suit. So for instance, Rwanda has Vision 2020 plan focusing on investments into ICT infrastructure. Ghana has its own Digital Ghana agenda, also trying to leverage ICT for socioeconomic development. Nigeria also has a booming digital economy, especially around Lagos. And obviously South Africa has been one of the hubs for all the sort of digital nomads and people working in the tech industry to focus on like e-commerce, software developments, and so on and so forth. So these kind of developments, especially leveraging, again, the information technology for further developments in the African countries, are something that is very welcoming and at the same time, I think, pretty innovative as well.
Tourism and cultural exchanges are also important in boosting bilateral ties with Africa. With the 2024 Korea-Africa Summit approaching, a special event was held to mark it. Let's have some glimpses into the event. Please take a look.
Ahead of the 2024 Korea-Africa Summit, an event was held at a park near the Hangang River. The event was held on May 25, which marks Africa Day, when African people remember the history of the African continent, share culture, and pledge to achieve prosperity. The first spot to visit to experience Africa. It is a hands-on arts and crafts program using coffee mud. Exclamations of disappointments and cheers are heard here and there as a quiz contest on Africa is underway. It is an opportunity to learn more about Africa, and also win prizes. A number of contestants were eliminated through tough questions. Just 2 people have survived to the last round, and there is only 1 question left.
아프리카 현지분들도 골든벨도 참여하셔가지고 받을 거라고 생각 못했는데 받게 되어서 쩔쩔하고 기쁜 것 같아요. 저는 아무래도 전공생으로서 아프리카에 대한 인식이 아직 높지 않다고 생각을 해가지고 이런 행사를 계기로 많은 분들이 좀 재밌는 대륙, 약간 흥이 많은 대륙 이렇게 생각해주시면서 많이 관심 가져주셨으면 좋겠습니다.
The atmosphere is heating up with an African djembe drumming performance. It is an interactive event, inviting people to join and feel the rhythms of Africa themselves. A man and his daughter are seen enjoying the performance to the fullest. Their dancing looks exceptional. He is Emmanuel Senu, a dancer and a choreographer from Burkina Faso in West Africa.
여러분 안녕하세요. 제 이름은 에마누엘 사누입니다. 굴레칸 팀의 아무가입니다. 반갑습니다.
He teaches African dance to Korean children and holds performances for people with disabilities.
I come in here 2012, and this one I want to share in our culture. And for me, to meet young people is for Korea for the future, to making the young people to be more open-minded, to be more welcome at their culture and our diversity can live in together. 이렇게 또 계속 하고 있어요.
Senu makes Africa and its culture more accessible by combining African dance with Korean music.
I hope in future Korea have this already have welcome, just have to stay together, to have more open mind to be together.
Through these exchange, Korean and African people get closer beyond various barriers, ranging from borders to cultural and racial differences.
네, 저도 아기가 젬베 저런 거 해보면서 너무 즐거워하는 것 같아서 관심 많이 가지게 되었고 다음번에 또 이런 행사 내년에 있다고 하니까 꼭 참여해보고 싶습니다.
오늘 공연 보고 언젠가 기회 되면 아프리카도 한번 꼭 놀러 가고 싶다. 먼 곳이지만 막 그런 생각이 들 정도로 너무 좋았습니다.
It must be a good occasion of opportunities for those who wanted to discover unknown and fascinating aspects of Africa. Public interest in Africa is continuing to grow lately in South. Dr. Han, what accounts for the surge of number of tourists heading to Africa?
Actually, the statistics of the UN World Tourism Organization shows that the number of tourists to Africa was 19 million in 2021, and that it jumped by 171% in 2022. And if I take a case of Kenya, which is one of the most visited countries in sub-Saharan Africa, Kenya saw an increase in its tourists by 70% in 2022 compared to the previous year. And also the income from the tourism increased as well by 83%. That is a huge jump, I think. Because tourism is one of the key sectors in Africa. You might find it interesting is that more Koreans will be visiting to Africa soon because the travel agencies are now rolling out like various travel packages for African countries. And although it's a bit costly, but still the sales rate is very high, and apparently some of the packages are nearly sold out.
I see. What accounts for this surge of interest and the tourism in South Korea for Africa?
I'm no tourism expert, but I can speculate about maybe a few potential factors, namely something like, say, increased accessibility, increased access to information, as well as sort of proactive sort of policies or gestures that some of the African governments have been taking in order to promote greater tourism. So, for example, specifically for Korea, Ethiopian Airlines, for instance, starting from 2023, started to fly 6 times a week between Seoul and Addis Ababa for a direct flight. And so having such ease of access provided, I think, is at least one of the factors that contributes to the increase of Korean tourists in thinking about visiting or actually visiting parts of Africa as well. And social media platforms like YouTube, we've seen over the course of COVID and after, increasing number of these pretty influential and popular sort of tourist YouTube channels that shows people traveling to various different parts of the world, including Africa, and then showing, you know, the different experiences and different cuisines and all these like tourist attractions that you can have access to. So I think having access to such information more readily available and much more in an interesting manner, I think also helped sort of boost the interest of the Korean public in traveling to Africa. Lastly, some of the African countries, namely South Africa, Kenya, as Dr. Han mentioned, or Rwanda, Ethiopia, Morocco, all try to ease parts of visa regulations, for instance, making it easier for foreign tourists to get the visa on the arrival or to apply for them before the actual travels, or having these marketing campaigns strategically focusing on people who may be interested in visiting parts of their countries, I think has been also a very successful factor in attributing to these sort of increased interest of the Korean tourists for visits to Africa.
Now we are going to host the first Korea-Africa Summit next week in Seoul. What is to be done for this great opportunity to be really successful? What to expect from this summit meeting?
I hope that this will be an opportunity for the government to really shift from its multi-layered approach to a more unified system of cooperation with Africa that involves all levels of government. Another thing I would like to mention is that as the cooperation evolves, I think we really need to think about how to respect the rich diversity within Africa. So to really expand further the cooperation further with Africa, we have to really delve deeper and broaden our understanding on different regions and different countries within Africa.
Professor Lee?
There are a few things that I'd really like to see coming out from the summit. First is having some really tangible action plans after the summit. So, of course, at the highest level of diplomacy, oftentimes things are going to be about sort of general gestures and sort of broad agreements and so on and so forth. But for things to actually move further, I think at the action officers levels, what are the plans, what are the actual sort of actions that people can take, making these into sort of tangible writings and having the agreements and so on, I think is going to be key for making this kind of effort to actually yield some benefits and fruits and moving further along the lines. And secondly, I also hope that the event itself can serve as a stepping stone to raise public awareness, both in Korea as well as the participating African countries as well. So, this is a highest level summit, the presidents and prime ministers meeting together and the ministers also attending. Yet I think the public awareness of the significance of this meeting itself is somewhat limited to say the least. So follow-up actions to ensure that there are, say, like op-eds and sort of newspaper reportings to be done, not just in Korea, but also in the participating countries as well, so that the public can at least get a little bit more awareness of these actions and the relationship, I think will be very important. And lastly, I really would like to emphasize that, at least personally, I really like to see this summit being not just the Korea-Africa Summit, but the first Korea-Africa Summit for many more to come in the future. So any of these relationships to actually mean something, I think there needs to be a sustained effort and time and attention that gets poured in and year out. So not just having a one-shot event, but making sure that we can have this on a regular basis, I think will be a very important thing to consider as we go forward.
The Korea-Africa Summit will surely provide golden opportunities for both sides and the rest of the world for mutual understanding, economic cooperation, and people-to-people exchange. This is all we have today. Next week, we'll present a special edition on the 2024 Korea-Africa Summit. Professor Lee and Dr. Han, thank you so much for sharing your insights and knowledge about this important topic.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We'll be back with other up-to-date issues. Thanks for watching and goodbye.